The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her helmet and checked her equipment for the third time. At 26 years old, she had already served 2 tours in Afghanistan and earned the respect of every Marine in her unit. Her dark eyes held a determination that had carried her through the toughest moments of her military career, and today would test that resolve like never before. Maria came from a family of 5 children in a small town in Texas. Her father worked double shifts at a factory while her mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. When Maria announced her intention to join the Marines after high school, her family was both proud and terrified. She was the first in her family to serve in the military, and the responsibility of representing not just herself, but her entire family weighed heavily on her shoulders. During her basic training at Parris Island, Maria quickly distinguished herself as a natural leader. Her drill instructors noticed her ability to motivate struggling recruits and her unwavering commitment to the Marine Corps values of honor, courage, and commitment. She graduated at the top of her class and was selected for advanced combat training, specializing in explosive ordnance disposal. Her first deployment to Afghanistan came when she was just 22. The experience was brutal and transformative. She witnessed the loss of close friends and faced life-threatening situations almost daily. During one particularly dangerous mission, Maria single-handedly disarmed 3 improvised explosive devices while under enemy fire, saving the lives of her entire squad. For this act of bravery, she was awarded the Bronze Star Medal with Combat 5, making her one of the youngest female Marines to receive such an honor. When she returned from her second deployment 6 months ago, Maria noticed changes in herself that worried her deeply. The nightmares came almost every night now, vivid recreations of explosions and fallen comrades. She would wake up in cold sweats, her heart racing as if she were still dodging enemy bullets. The sounds of helicopters or sudden loud noises would send her into a state of hypervigilance that took hours to subside. Despite these struggles, Maria never missed a day of duty. She believed that showing weakness would dishonor the memory of the Marines she had lost overseas. She attended therapy sessions as required by the military, but found it difficult to open up about her experiences. The therapist, a kind civilian woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, repeatedly encouraged Maria to be more forthcoming about her symptoms. But Maria maintained that she could handle whatever challenges came her way. Today's assignment was supposed to be routine. Maria had been tasked with leading a training exercise for new recruits who were preparing for their first overseas deployment. The exercise involved teaching proper procedures for identifying and reporting suspected explosive devices in a simulated combat environment. It was the kind of mission Maria could complete with her eyes closed, which made it perfect for her current state of mind. As she walked toward the training area, Maria's squad of 12 new Marines followed behind her, their faces a mixture of excitement and nervousness. These young men and women, barely out of their teens, reminded Maria of herself just a few years ago. They looked at her with admiration and respect, knowing her reputation as one of the most decorated female Marines on the base. What they didn't know was that behind her confident exterior, Maria was fighting a daily battle against the invisible wounds of war. The training facility was designed to replicate the urban environments that Marines might encounter during deployment. Mock buildings, vehicles, and debris created a realistic setting for combat scenarios. Today's exercise would involve the recruits working in teams to clear a designated area, while Maria observed and provided guidance. As the Marines began their training, Maria positioned herself at an observation post that provided a clear view of the entire exercise area. She watched as the young recruits moved cautiously through the simulated battlefield, their movements awkward but improving with each repetition. Maria felt a sense of pride watching them learn the skills that might one day save their lives, or the lives of their fellow Marines. However, as the morning progressed, Maria began to feel an uncomfortable sensation building in her chest. At first, she attributed it to the heat, but the feeling intensified as the sounds of the training exercise grew louder. The simulated explosions and gunfire that were part of the training began to trigger something deep within her psyche. Her breathing became shallow, and she felt beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite the relatively cool morning temperature. Maria tried to focus on her breathing exercises, techniques she had learned in therapy to manage her anxiety. She closed her eyes for a moment and attempted to ground herself by identifying 5 things she could see, 4 things she could touch, 3 things she could hear, 2 things she could smell, and 1 thing she could taste. But the sounds of the exercise continued to penetrate her consciousness, each explosion and shout pulling her back to the dusty roads of Afghanistan, where danger lurked around every corner. The newest members of her squad looked up to her as a hero, someone who had faced the worst that war had to offer, and emerged victorious. They saw her medals, heard the stories of her bravery, and aspired to serve with the same distinction. But they couldn't see the internal battle she fought every single day, the way her hands sometimes shook when she thought no one was looking, or how she checked and rechecked locks on doors and windows at night. As the training exercise continued around her, Maria struggled to maintain her composure. She knew that showing any sign of weakness in front of the new recruits would undermine their confidence and possibly affect their performance in real combat situations. The weight of leadership and the responsibility she felt toward these young Marines added another layer of pressure to her already strained mental state. The morning was about to take a turn that would change not only Maria's life but also the lives of everyone present at the training facility that day. The sound that changed everything came at exactly 10:47 a.m. Maria was observing the training exercise when a maintenance truck backfired in the distance, the sharp crack echoing across the training grounds like a sniper's rifle. In that instant, Maria's carefully constructed composure shattered. Her body tensed, her breathing became rapid and shallow, and the world around her began to shift and blur as her mind transported her back to a dusty road outside Kandahar. In her mind, she was no longer at Camp Pendleton watching recruits practice combat scenarios. She was crouched behind a damaged Humvee, the acrid smell of smoke filling her nostrils as insurgent fighters positioned themselves in the buildings ahead. The voices of her fellow Marines calling for backup mixed with the present-day instructions being shouted to the trainees, creating a disorienting cocktail of past and present that left Maria struggling to distinguish between the two. The young Marines continued their exercise, unaware that their instructor was experiencing a severe episode of post-traumatic stress. Private Johnson, a 19-year-old from Ohio, was the first to notice that something was wrong. He had been looking toward the observation post for guidance when he saw Sergeant Rodriguez gripping the railing with white knuckles, her usually steady hands now trembling visibly. Maria's training kicked in despite her mental state. Even as her mind fought to process the conflicting signals between past trauma and present reality, her eyes swept the training area with the hypervigilance of a combat veteran. It was this automatic scanning that allowed her to spot something that would have been invisible to less experienced eyes. Hidden beneath a pile of training debris in the path of the advancing recruits was something that didn't belong. The object was small, no larger than a cell phone, but its placement and the way it was concealed sent immediate alarm bells through Maria's consciousness. Years of experience in explosive ordnance disposal had trained her to recognize the subtle signs that others might miss. The device appeared to be jury-rigged with wires and what looked like a small timer mechanism. Whether it was a forgotten piece of training equipment or something more sinister, Maria couldn't tell from her position, but she knew with absolute certainty that it posed a potential threat to the 12 Marines who were steadily advancing toward it. The rational part of Maria's mind knew that live explosives should never be present during a training exercise, but her combat-conditioned instincts overrode logic. In her current state, influenced by the flashbacks and the hyper-arousal of her nervous system, the possibility that this could be a real threat felt absolutely genuine. The safety of her Marines took precedence over everything else, including her own well-being. Maria's voice caught in her throat as she tried to call out a warning. The words that should have come easily to an experienced sergeant refused to form coherently. Her PTSD symptoms were intensifying, making it difficult for her to communicate effectively. Precious seconds ticked by as she struggled to overcome the paralysis that was gripping her vocal cords. Meanwhile, the training exercise continued below. The recruits, focused on their assigned tasks, moved steadily toward the area where the suspicious object lay hidden. Private Martinez, an eager young woman from California, was leading her team's advance and would be the first to reach the potentially dangerous area. Her teammates followed close behind, trusting in her leadership and completely unaware of any potential danger. Maria's military training finally overcame her trauma response. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she still possessed, she forced herself to move. Rising from her position at the observation post, she began running toward the training area. her legs feeling like they were moving through thick mud. Each step required enormous effort as her body fought against the physiological effects of her panic attack. As she ran, Maria's vision tunneled, focusing entirely on the path between herself and her Marines. The peripheral details of the training facility faded away, leaving only the essential elements: the advancing recruits, the suspicious object, and the rapidly decreasing distance between them. Her breathing was labored, not from the physical exertion but from the overwhelming stress response that was flooding her system with adrenaline. The other Marines conducting the exercise began to notice their instructor's unusual behavior. Staff Sergeant Williams, who was supervising another group of trainees nearby, looked up to see Maria sprinting across the training ground with an expression of intense urgency. Her movements were erratic, lacking the smooth precision that characterized her normal gait, and her face was pale with determination and fear. Maria's mind was operating on multiple levels simultaneously. One part of her consciousness was locked in the traumatic memories of Afghanistan, reliving moments of mortal danger and split-second decisions. Another part was hyper-aware of the present situation, calculating distances, assessing threats, and planning her response. The collision of these mental states created a perfect storm of confusion and clarity that drove her forward with singular purpose. As she neared the training area, Maria could see Private Martinez just steps away from the suspicious object. The young Marine was moving with the careful deliberation of someone following proper clearance procedures, but she had no idea what might be waiting for her. Maria's protective instincts, honed by years of looking after her squad members in combat, overrode every other consideration. The final 50 meters felt like an eternity. Maria's legs pumped with desperate energy as she closed the distance between herself and her Marines. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, drowning out the sounds of the training exercise around her. The taste of metal filled her mouth, a common symptom of extreme stress that she recognized from her combat experiences. Other Marines in the area began to realize that something significant was happening. The urgency in Maria's movements and the distress visible on her face told them that this was no ordinary training scenario. Some began moving toward the area to provide assistance, while others stepped back to give her room to work. As Maria reached the perimeter of the training area, she made a decision that would define not only the rest of that day but the rest of her career. Drawing on every ounce of strength and courage she possessed, she prepared to place herself directly between her Marines and what she perceived to be mortal danger. The woman who had earned medals for her bravery in combat was about to demonstrate once again that her commitment to protecting others knew no bounds. The stage was set for an act of heroism that would be remembered long after the dust had settled on this training ground. Without hesitation, Maria launched herself into the training area, her voice finally breaking through the barrier of her trauma. "Get back! Everyone get back now!" The command erupted from her with such force and authority that every Marine in the vicinity immediately froze. Years of military conditioning had taught them to respond instantly to that tone of voice. Regardless of the circumstances, Private Martinez, who had been just 3 steps away from the suspicious object, immediately dropped to the ground and began crawling backward as she had been trained. The other recruits followed suit, their movements quick and precise despite their confusion about what was happening. They trusted their sergeant implicitly, and if she said there was danger, then danger was exactly what they would assume they were facing. Maria reached the area where the object lay hidden and threw herself down beside it, her body serving as a human shield between the potential explosive device and her Marines. The physical impact of hitting the ground jarred her already fragile mental state, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed similar actions dozens of times in real combat situations. As Maria examined the object more closely, her training and experience began to override the panic-induced assumptions that had driven her desperate sprint across the training ground. The device, which had appeared so threatening from a distance, revealed itself to be a modified training simulator that had apparently malfunctioned or been incorrectly placed. The wires she had seen were indeed real, but they were connected to a harmless smoke generator rather than explosive materials. However, Maria's mind was no longer operating with its usual clarity. The combination of her PTSD episode, The physical exertion of her sprint, and the massive adrenaline dump from believing she was saving her Marines from imminent death, had pushed her body beyond its limits. Her hands continued to work on disabling what she perceived to be a threat, even as her vision began to blur and her breathing became increasingly labored. The Marines she had ordered to retreat watched in amazement and growing concern as their sergeant worked over the device with intense concentration. From their perspective, she was performing the same kind of heroic bomb disposal work that had earned her decorations in Afghanistan. They had no way of knowing that the device posed no actual threat or that their instructor was experiencing a severe psychological crisis. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had been observing from a distance, immediately radioed for medical support and additional security. His years of experience told him that something was seriously wrong with the situation, though he couldn't yet identify exactly what. He began moving toward Maria's position while coordinating with other personnel to secure the area and account for all Marines present at the exercise. Maria's movements became increasingly erratic as her body fought against the effects of stress and exhaustion. Her fingers, which had once been steady enough to defuse real bombs under enemy fire, now trembled as she attempted to disconnect what she believed were dangerous components. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with tears that she didn't even realize she was shedding. The psychological weight of reliving her combat experiences while simultaneously believing she was protecting her current Marines created a perfect storm of emotional and physical stress. Maria's breathing became rapid and shallow, the classic signs of hyperventilation beginning to manifest as her body struggled to process the overwhelming stimuli. As she worked, Maria began speaking to herself in the same calm, methodical way she had during her real bomb disposal missions overseas. Red wire leads to the timer mechanism. Blue wire appears to be the primary trigger. Need to isolate the power source before attempting removal. Her voice was steady and professional, even as her hands shook and her vision continued to deteriorate. The Marines watching from their safe positions were witnessing what they believed to be an incredible display of courage and skill. Private Martinez, the young woman who had been closest to the perceived danger, felt a mixture of gratitude and awe as she watched her sergeant risk her life to protect the squad. She had no way of knowing that Maria was fighting battles on multiple fronts, against a device that posed no real threat, against the memories that haunted her daily, and against a body that was rapidly approaching complete exhaustion. Dr. Sarah Chen, Maria's therapist, had warned her about exactly this kind of scenario during their sessions. She had explained how traumatic stress could create situations where past and present became dangerously blurred, leading to responses that might be inappropriate for the actual circumstances. Maria had dismissed these warnings, confident in her ability to maintain control over her reactions. Now, as her world spun out of control, she was experiencing firsthand the power of unprocessed trauma to override logic and training. As Maria made what she believed to be the final adjustment to render the device safe, her body finally reached its breaking point. The combination of physical stress, emotional trauma, and sheer exhaustion converged in a moment of complete system shutdown. Her vision went white, then black as her consciousness began to slip away. The device she had been working on was indeed harmless, but Maria's belief that she had just saved 12 Marines from death or serious injury filled her with a sense of completion and relief, even as she began to collapse. Her last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude that she had been able to protect her people one more time. Maria's body pitched forward, and she collapsed directly on top of the training device she had been so desperately trying to neutralize. Her fall was sudden and complete, the kind of unconsciousness that comes from total physical and emotional exhaustion. Her breathing became shallow but steady, and her pulse, while elevated, began to stabilize as her body finally allowed itself to rest. The Marines who had been watching in tense silence suddenly realized that their hero had fallen. Private Martinez was the first to move, instinctively starting toward her sergeant before being firmly but gently restrained by Staff Sergeant Williams. Medical personnel were already en route, and the last thing anyone needed was untrained personnel potentially complicating the situation. As Maria lay unconscious on the training ground, her body finally at rest after the tremendous effort she had just expended, none of the Marines present fully understood what had just occurred. What they did know was that their sergeant had placed herself in what she believed to be mortal danger to protect them, and that kind of selfless heroism deserved Recognition and respect, the stage was set for a discovery that would reveal the true nature of Maria's sacrifice and the invisible wounds that drove her to such extraordinary lengths to protect her fellow Marines. The medical team arrived within 3 minutes of Staff Sergeant Williams' radio call, their movements swift and professional as they approached Maria's unconscious form. Corpsman First Class Rebecca Torres, a veteran medic with over 8 years of military service, immediately began assessing Maria's vital signs while her partner, Hospital Corpsman Daniel Kim, examined the device that lay beneath her. "Vitals are stable but elevated," Torres reported as she checked Maria's pulse and breathing. "Blood pressure is high, consistent with extreme stress response. She appears to have fainted from exhaustion and psychological distress." Her experienced hands moved gently but efficiently, ensuring that Maria's airway was clear and that she hadn't sustained any injuries during her collapse. Kim's examination of the training device revealed what many of the observers were beginning to suspect. "This is a standard Mark 7 training simulator," he announced to Staff Sergeant Williams. "It's designed to produce smoke and sound effects. The components Sergeant Rodriguez was working on are completely harmless." His voice carried a mixture of relief and growing understanding of what had actually transpired. As word of Kim's discovery spread among the Marines present, a complex mixture of emotions began to emerge. The initial relief that there had been no actual explosive device quickly gave way to a deeper appreciation for what Maria had just demonstrated. She had been willing to sacrifice herself based on her perception of danger, regardless of whether that perception aligned with reality. Private Martinez, still shaken by the proximity she had come to what her sergeant believed was mortal danger, found herself fighting back tears. "She thought it was real," she whispered to Private Johnson. "She really thought she was saving our lives." The young Marine's voice carried a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak as she began to understand the invisible burden their instructor had been carrying. Staff Sergeant Williams coordinated the response with calm efficiency, but his mind was racing as he pieced together the implications of what had occurred. He had served long enough to recognize the signs of post-traumatic stress, and Maria's actions fit a pattern he had seen in other combat veterans. His immediate priority was ensuring her medical care, but he was already considering the broader impact this incident would have on her career and well-being. As Torres continued monitoring Maria's condition, she began to regain consciousness slowly. Her eyes fluttered open and she immediately tried to sit up, her first instinct being to check on the status of her Marines. "The device," she mumbled, her voice weak but urgent. "Did everyone get clear? Is everyone safe?" "Everyone is safe, Sergeant," Torres assured her gently. "You need to stay still while we check you over." But Maria's concern for her Marines overrode the medic's instructions. She struggled to focus her vision on the faces surrounding her, counting heads and looking for any signs of injury among the recruits she had been training. The truth about the training device was withheld from Maria initially, as Torres recognized that her current mental state made her vulnerable to additional psychological distress. Instead, the medic focused on providing reassurance and basic medical care while preparing Maria for transport to the base medical facility for a more thorough evaluation. Word of the incident began to spread throughout Camp Pendleton with the speed that only military communities can achieve. Within an hour, Marines throughout the base were discussing the story of Sergeant Rodriguez, who had collapsed after what she believed was a life-saving bomb disposal operation. The details varied with each retelling, but the core message remained consistent. One of their own had been willing to sacrifice everything to protect her fellow Marines. Colonel James Mitchell, the base commanding officer, received a detailed briefing about the incident within 90 minutes of its occurrence. As a Vietnam veteran with over 30 years of military service, Mitchell immediately recognized the complex situation that was developing. He understood both the heroism that Maria had demonstrated and the underlying mental health issues that needed to be addressed with sensitivity and care. This Marine risked her life based on her perception of danger. Mitchell explained to his staff during an emergency meeting. The fact that the device was harmless doesn't diminish the courage she showed or the sacrifice she was willing to make. However, it does highlight the urgent need for us to address the psychological wounds that our combat veterans are carrying. Dr. Chen, Maria's therapist, was contacted immediately and asked to provide input on Maria's condition and treatment needs. Her professional assessment confirmed what many had already begun to suspect. Maria was experiencing severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that had been exacerbated by the training environment's resemblance to her combat experiences. Sergeant Rodriguez has been fighting a daily battle against trauma that most people cannot imagine, Dr. Chen explained to the medical team. Today's incident represents both a crisis and an opportunity. She has demonstrated incredible courage, while also revealing the extent of her psychological wounds. With proper treatment and support, this could be a turning point in her recovery. The 12 Marines who had been participating in the training exercise were brought together for a debriefing session led by the base chaplain and a military psychologist. The session was designed to help them process what they had witnessed and understand the broader implications of their sergeant's actions. Many of them struggled with conflicting emotions, feeling grateful for Maria's protection while also saddened by the invisible pain she had been enduring. Private Martinez spoke for many of her fellow Marines when she said, "I don't care that the device wasn't real. She thought it was, and she was willing to die to protect us. That's not something you forget." Her words captured the sentiment that was beginning to coalesce throughout the base. Maria's heroism was defined not by the reality of the threat, but by her willingness to face what she perceived as mortal danger for the sake of others. As news of the incident continued to spread, it reached the attention of General Patricia Hayes, the commanding general of the entire Marine Corps base. Hayes, a groundbreaking female leader in the military, recognized both the heroism of Maria's actions and the opportunity they presented to address the broader issues of mental health and PTSD among combat veterans. This incident illuminates both the best and the most challenging aspects of military service, General Hayes observed during a briefing with her senior staff. Sergeant Rodriguez embodies the values we hold most dear: selfless service, courage under fire, and protection of fellow Marines. At the same time, her actions highlight the invisible wounds that too many of our warriors carry in silence. The decision was made to acknowledge Maria's actions formally while also using the incident as a catalyst for broader discussions about mental health support and PTSD awareness throughout the military community. Plans began to take shape for a ceremony that would honor not only Maria's courage but also the struggles faced by all combat veterans dealing with invisible wounds. As Maria rested in the base medical facility, sedated and under careful observation, she remained unaware of the profound impact her actions were having throughout Camp Pendleton and beyond. Her willingness to sacrifice herself, even in response to a threat that existed only in her trauma-affected perception, was inspiring conversations about heroism, mental health, and the true cost of military service that would resonate far beyond the boundaries of the base. 3 days after the incident, Maria sat in her hospital bed at the base medical facility, finally feeling clear-headed for the first time in months. The combination of rest, medication adjustment, and intensive therapy sessions had helped stabilize her condition significantly. Dr. Chen had spent hours with her, helping her process not only the traumatic episode, but also the underlying PTSD symptoms that had gone untreated for too long. "I feel like such a fool," Maria confided to Dr. Chen during one of their sessions. "I put everyone at risk because I couldn't tell the difference between a training exercise and real combat. How can I ever face my Marines again?" The shame and embarrassment in her voice were palpable, reflecting the internal struggle she was experiencing as she came to terms with what had happened. Dr. Chen leaned forward in her chair, her expression both professional and compassionate. "Maria, what you experienced was not weakness or failure. It was the result of invisible wounds that are just as real and just as serious as any physical injury you might have sustained in combat. The fact that you were willing to sacrifice yourself to protect others, regardless of the circumstances, speaks to your character and your commitment to your fellow Marines." Meanwhile, throughout Camp Pendleton, something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. The story of Maria's actions had spread far beyond the confines of the base, reaching Marines stationed around the world through social media, email, and word of mouth. Veterans who had experienced similar struggles began sharing their own stories, creating a groundswell of support and understanding that surprised even the base leadership. General Hayes had initially planned a small ceremony to acknowledge Maria's actions, but as the scope of interest and support became apparent, the plans began to grow. Marine units from across Southern California requested permission to attend, and veterans organizations, offered to participate in what was becoming a significant event focused on both heroism and mental health. Awareness Colonel Mitchell found himself coordinating with Marine Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. as senior leadership became aware of the powerful story emerging from Camp Pendleton. "This has become bigger than just one incident," Mitchell explained to General Hayes. "Sergeant Rodriguez has inadvertently become a symbol for thousands of Marines who are struggling with similar, invisible wounds. The decision was made to hold a formal ceremony that would serve multiple purposes, honoring Maria's courage, raising awareness about PTSD and mental health issues, and demonstrating the Marine Corps' commitment to supporting veterans dealing with combat-related psychological injuries. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Friday, giving time for Marines from throughout the region to arrange their attendance. As word of the ceremony spread, Maria began receiving visits from Marines she had never met. Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, a Iraq War veteran, visited her to share his own struggles with PTSD and to thank her for bringing attention to an issue that affected so many service members. "You've given a voice to something a lot of us have been fighting in silence," he told her. "That takes a different kind of courage." Corporal Lisa Anderson, who had served in Syria, brought a letter signed by 37 female Marines from her unit. "We wanted you to know that you represent the best of what it means to be a Marine," Anderson read from the letter. "Your willingness to put others before yourself, even while fighting your own battles, exemplifies the values we all swore to uphold." On Thursday evening, the day before the ceremony, Maria was cleared by the medical team to return to limited duty. Dr. Chen had recommended a graduated return to normal activities, with continued therapy and medication management. As Maria walked across the base toward her quarters, she was struck by the number of Marines who stopped to salute her or offer words of encouragement. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, with unseasonably cool temperatures that made the event more comfortable for the large gathering that was expected. As Maria prepared for the ceremony, she was informed that over 500 Marines had confirmed their attendance, making it one of the largest voluntary assemblies in the base's recent history. Maria felt a mixture of emotions as she put on her dress uniform for the ceremony. Pride in the recognition she was receiving, mingled with anxiety about being the center of attention and uncertainty about her future in the Marine Corps. The Bronze Star Medal she had earned in Afghanistan felt heavier than usual as she pinned it to her uniform, reminding her of the journey that had led to this moment. The ceremony was held on the main parade ground, with Marines arranged in precise formations that stretched across the vast open space. As Maria emerged from the building where she had been waiting, she was stunned by the sight that greeted her. Hundreds of Marines stood at attention in perfect ranks, their uniforms crisp and their bearing impeccable. General Hayes served as the ceremony's presiding officer, with Colonel Mitchell and other senior leaders flanking her on the reviewing platform. As Maria approached the platform, accompanied by an honor guard, she could see faces in the crowd that represented every aspect of the Marine Corps. Young recruits like those she had been training, seasoned veterans with multiple deployments, officers and enlisted personnel, and Marines from every occupational specialty. "Today we gather to honor Sergeant Maria Rodriguez," General Hayes announced, her voice carrying clearly across the parade ground thanks to the amplification system. "We honor her not only for the courage she displayed under what she believed to be life-threatening circumstances, but also for the invisible battles she has fought in service to our nation." The general's speech acknowledged both Maria's heroism and the broader issues of mental health that affected many service members. She spoke about the importance of seeking help when needed, and the obligation of the Marine Corps to support those who had given so much in defense of freedom. Her words resonated deeply with the assembled Marines, many of whom had their own experiences with the psychological challenges of military service. When General Hayes called for Maria to step forward to receive special recognition, the moment that would define the entire ceremony occurred. As one, all 500 Marines present raised their hands in a perfect salute, creating a sea of respect and admiration that stretched as far as Maria could see. The silence was profound and powerful, broken only by the sound of flags flapping in the gentle breeze. Maria felt tears streaming down her face as she returned the salute, overwhelmed by the display of support and solidarity from her fellow Marines. In that moment, she realized that her struggles with PTSD had not diminished her in their eyes, but had instead highlighted the sacrifices that all combat veterans make, both seen and unseen. The salute seemed to last forever, but in reality it lasted exactly 60 seconds. When General Hayes finally called for the Marines to lower their hands, the sound of 500 arms dropping in unison created a moment of profound silence that seemed to acknowledge both the gravity of the ceremony and the hope it represented for the future. Maria stood on the platform, still overwhelmed by the display of respect and solidarity she had just witnessed. General Hayes presented her with a specially commissioned recognition that had been created for the occasion. The award acknowledged her extraordinary courage in the face of perceived danger and her unwitting service as an advocate for mental health awareness among combat veterans. However, the true impact of that day would be measured not in the awards or recognition Maria received, but in the conversations and changes that began immediately after the ceremony concluded. As the Marines dispersed from the parade ground, small groups formed throughout the base where service members began sharing their own experiences with combat stress and PTSD for the first time. Private Martinez, who had been closest to the perceived danger during the training exercise, approached Maria after the ceremony with tears in her eyes. "Sergeant, I want you to know that what happened that day changed how I think about courage," she said. "It's not just about facing the enemy. It's about facing your own demons and still showing up to protect others." In the weeks that followed, Camp Pendleton experienced what mental health professionals would later describe as a breakthrough in military psychology support. The number of Marines seeking help for stress, anxiety, and PTSD-related issues increased by over 300%. More importantly, the stigma that had previously surrounded mental health treatment began to diminish as service members saw Maria's example of seeking help while maintaining her status as a respected leader. Dr. Chen found herself busier than ever, but also more optimistic about the progress being made in military mental health treatment. Maria's incident created a teachable moment that we might not have had for years otherwise, she explained to a gathering of military mental health professionals. She showed that seeking help is not a sign of weakness but a demonstration of strength and commitment to continued service. The story of Maria's heroism and the subsequent ceremony reached far beyond Camp Pendleton. Military mental health organizations across the country began using her story as an example of how invisible wounds could be addressed with compassion and understanding rather than judgment and shame. Veterans groups invited Maria to speak at conferences and events, sharing her experience to help other combat veterans who were struggling with similar issues. 3 months after the ceremony, Maria returned to full duty with a new assignment that reflected both her experience and her newfound role as an advocate for mental health awareness. She was tasked with developing and implementing improved PTSD support protocols for Marines transitioning from combat deployments to stateside assignments. The irony was not lost on her that her lowest moment had led to what might become her most important contribution to the Marine Corps. The training exercise where the incident had occurred was redesigned based on lessons learned from Maria's experience. New protocols were put in place to ensure that training scenarios did not inadvertently trigger trauma responses in participants, and additional mental health screening was implemented for Marines assigned to training instructor roles. Maria's relationship with the 12 Marines she had been training that day evolved into something special. They requested her as their instructor for advanced training courses, and several cited her influence as a factor in their decision to pursue longer military careers. Private Martinez, in particular, went on to become a combat engineer herself, often crediting Maria's example of selfless service as her inspiration. The impact on Maria's family was profound as well. Her parents, who had worried about their daughter throughout her military career, finally understood the full extent of the challenges she had been facing. Her father, a proud man who rarely showed emotion, broke down in tears when Maria called to tell him about the ceremony. "I always knew you were a hero," he told her, "but now I understand what that really cost you." A year later, Maria received notification that she had been selected for promotion to staff sergeant, a recognition of both her military service and her contributions to improving mental health support within the Marine Corps. The promotion ceremony was attended by many of the same Marines who had saluted her on that emotional day, creating a sense of continuity and shared purpose that reinforced the bonds between them. Dr. Chen, who continued to work with Maria on managing her PTSD symptoms, marveled at the transformation she had witnessed. Maria went from feeling ashamed and isolated to becoming a leader in mental health advocacy, she observed. Her willingness to be vulnerable about her struggles has helped countless other Marines find the courage to seek help. The training device that had triggered the entire incident was eventually retired and replaced with newer equipment, but not before it was used one final time in a controlled demonstration. Maria herself participated in the demonstration, showing how proper identification and assessment could distinguish between real threats and training equipment. Her calm professional handling of the device served as a powerful symbol of her recovery and growth as Maria reflected on the journey from that terrifying morning when she collapsed on the training ground to her current role as a mental health advocate and leader. She realized that her moment of greatest vulnerability had become her greatest strength. The 500 Marines who had saluted her that day had not just been honoring her heroism. They had been acknowledging their shared commitment to supporting each other through whatever challenges they might face. The ceremony at Camp Pendleton became an annual event, with each year's gathering focusing on different aspects of military mental health and veteran support. Maria spoke at each ceremony, sharing her story and encouraging other Marines to seek help when they needed it. Her message was always the same. Seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of the same courage that Marines show in combat. Years later, when young Marines would ask Maria about that day, she would tell them that the real victory was not in disarming a device or even in the recognition she received afterward. The real victory was in learning that her fellow Marines would stand with her no matter what battles she was fighting, both visible and invisible. That knowledge, she would say, made all the difference in her recovery and in her continued service to the Corps she loved.